Aircraft pilots see a lot of amazing sights above the earth in planes and even spaceships sometimes. But men who do this challenging work often confront the nastier sides of these hard jobs, struggling to stay good in a gritty world. For pilot and new sci-fi novelist Dan Daetz, these realities rocket into a cosmic setting when one man with the ugliest job in the universe must break free from his past. This week, what if a bad father with a worse job fought to become a hero?
Speculative fiction, like no other genre, reflects the creativity of God.
If you look at the scriptures, you're going to have to see that God uses imagination more than rational discourse.
We are supposed to be image bearers for a vastly creative God.
Reading fantastical fiction opened a portal in my imagination for a place other than just a materialistic world.
I experienced the gospel story with the mind of someone who loved adventure and loved the idea of light conquering darkness.
We're wired for stories that reflect how we see the world in ways that are true.
The story is either pointing to Christ or it's pointing to our need for Christ.
Happy Father's Day to all who participate. This is Fantastical Truth, the podcast from Lorehaven.com, whose mission is to explore fantastical stories for God's glory. I'm Stephen Burnett. I publish Lorehaven, and I wrote my own sci-fi novel that launched a few months ago from Enclave Publishing called Above the Circle of Earth.
And I'm Zackary Russell, and I just downed a whole dose of Dramamine because I get very airsick whenever I travel by air, and we're going to have a pilot on soon. This is episode 267, What If a Bad Father Fought to Be a Hero? We'll be joined soon by Dan Daetz.
Zach, there was a time, up until I think the inauguration of 2005, that I never flew on a plane. My parents told me that we took you on a plane one time when you were little, but of course I barely remembered that. And then I have probably flown, obviously commercially, dozens of times, mostly to events. Last month I was on a plane a couple of times, going to Tennessee and then Florida and then to North Carolina and then back home. All commercial flights, all did pretty well. I actually managed to fly first class on a budget airline. So I don't know if that counts as first class or not. I don't really need drinks or anything. I just need a little room to stretch out and read my books.
Yeah, I usually just get the poor man's first class on Southwest by getting the exit row whenever available. But it comes in handy because I'm 6'4". But you know, Stephen, on my day job, we take people on mission trips and stuff. And what's always fun is we'll take a student on a mission trip who'd never been on a plane before. And I still remember these students we took from rural Kansas all the way over to the UK. And that was the very first flight they'd ever had. They'd only stayed with, I don't think they'd even left their state before that because they'd gone to school in a state school there. So, you know, it's just always exciting to do that. And you know, my kids are looking forward to a flight we're taking this summer for a ministry thing. But I never want it to get old that I'm flying in the air in a metal tube that's somehow staying aloft.
Yeah, it is basically a technology indistinguishable from magic, to quote that Arthur C. Clarke reference. By the way, we are flying high at Lorehaven.com, that website where you get articles and weekly reviews, as well as this podcast, Fantastical Truth. Just recently, we posted a review of Where Darkness Dwells, a kind of a spiritual warfare fantasy story. Just reviewed that. And then this coming week, we've got a review coming up for a book called The Midnight Prince, a Cinderella retelling that mixes in a different kind of magic system, as well as some palace intrigue. Both of those available at Lorehaven.com. We also had an on-screen piece just this past week, a fascinating sounding video game called The Claire Obscure Expedition 33, reviewed by Jenith Lead. She loved this game and the storytelling and the artwork, and I was surprised while editing to find out that they actually have some pretty heavy hitter actors in here, including Andy Serkis, famously, well, basically everybody in every fantasy franchise now, and then Charlie Cox as well. That is Daredevil. So interesting premise there, this game, and it is fascinating to read about. That's at our Lorehaven on-screen section. Just go to the front page right about now. You should be able to find those, or find the links in our show notes for this episode 267. You can also find all the links for our fantastic sponsors in this episode including this week's sponsor, courtesy of Oasis Family Media. It's once again the 1232 audio epic presented by Oasis Family Media. By the way, it's a Realm Award nominated audio drama now, 1232, from creators Callie Sue and Cheyenne Landry of Rumble Stump Entertainment. This is a faith in action adventure for all ages with 30 pulse pounding episodes. When the experimental research of a physicist goes awry, his estranged twin children follow him through time to medieval Wales in the year 1232 AD, where they come face to face with a brutal world filled with superstition and legends. Along the way, they meet a penniless leader, a dark sorceress, and a warrior priest who provoke the twins into confronting the truth about themselves, each other, and Jesus Christ. Right now, season 1 of 1232 is available for free wherever you get your podcasts or audiobooks. Start listening today to 1232, that's 1232, and visit audioepic.com. That's audio-epic.com to learn more about this production. Also, of course, in the show notes. And last week, Zach and I talked about the Realm Makers Expo with Mr. Realm Makers himself, Scott Miner. Mrs. Realm Makers, Rebecca P. Miner, Becky Miner, will join us in a future episode, hopefully. But go back and listen to episode 266, and you'll get anything that I would have said in a honorary sponsor segment here about the expo, which is now, oh dear, Zach, 1 month away. So start packing now. This is in addition to the Realm Makers Writers Conference, which has been going on every year since 2013. Yep, I was there. I should know the year. But now, 2025, 12 years later, they're not only doing the Writers Conference at the Davos Convention Center in Grand Rapids from July 18th through 20. They're also adding this expo, which is much more fan-centered, where Christian creators across all types of media are coming together, and we're going to celebrate our own stories together. There's a fantastic guest list. Lorehaven, of course, will be there. Zach will be there. I will be there, not only in my Lorehaven capacity, but as a new sci-fi author myself. And you can get all that info at realmmakers.com. You can also get at our website at Lorehaven, the show notes, further information about our upcoming guest, Dan Daetz, who I believe is storming into the outdoors. He's blowing pages everywhere. Wow. Well, I didn't know we had a parking spot for a fantastical hover jet whose downwash has made an absolute mess of the place. There are pages everywhere. You spilled my coffee, Dan. Really appreciate that, but it was kind of worth it because that is an amazing vehicle that you've brought in, and I appreciate all the other flight information you're going to be sharing from the pilot's cabin.
Yeah, sorry about the mess there, Stephen, but happy Father's Day to both of you, and so great to be here. By the way, Zach, you talked about the aluminum tube. And even as we're recording this, my son is in one of those heading down to a missions trip in Costa Rica. So that's one proud dad moment. What I haven't maybe mentioned in the pre-show was that my daughter is packing up to go to the East Coast to put an experiment on a NASA rocket.
Oh, wow.
So they're going to send cricket eggs into space in about 2 weeks and to see if they survive because, Matt Damon's got to have more than potatoes to eat when he colonizes Mars as
hey,
the
Matt,
space
don't
pirate.
Eat the bugs.
You've got
don't
to
eat the
eat
bugs,
bugs.
Matt. Don't live in the pod, Matt. Not even on Mars, you might need to live in a pod, at least for a while, until the settlement really expands. Dan, you've got quite a long resume here, but what brings you here specifically? You're going to get a sci-fi novel started, but before that, you have flown a whole lot of airplanes. I'm just curious if you could tell us a little bit more about how many Gs you've flown and what piloting experience you've had across your life so far.
Yeah, well, look, when I was about 2 years old, my parents said I would look up at the sky and watch things fly by. And so after high school, I went to this little school here in Colorado where I live now called the Air Force Academy. And that opened up the door for me to fly, in the end, probably about 30 different kinds of airplanes. Everything from biplanes to planes that land on lakes. My very last landing, I was an Air Force pilot. My very last landing, I landed on the dry lake beds of Edwards Air Force Base, which is where the space shuttle landed. Years ago, that was its first landing because you could have about a 5-mile runway on that dry lake bed.
In your bio here, it says you pulled Mach 2, so that's twice the speed of sound, so something like 1,500 miles an hour. So what plane was that in?
Well, in a couple, well, more than two actually. The fastest I've been, Zach, was in an F-15, and that was about Mach 2.3. I was flying from New Mexico to California, and I think I got there in like about 25 minutes.
Oh, wow.
I couldn't go at that fast the whole time because it would break a lot of windows, but it was a fun ride. Imagine driving your truck as fast as you could go on a gravel road. That was sort of the excitement level.
So it feels pretty bumpy then. I guess it's not super smooth to fly that fast.
Yeah, it's not quite like the airlines tell you about. So yes.
Well, interestingly, I think you mentioned NASA experiments there, Dan. Just a few days ago, as we record and release, it seems that there's been some demolition at the historic Launch Complex 37 site at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. Just on Thursday, they demolished some United Launch Alliance mobile service tower and some lightning towers because they got a new neighbor moving in, and that is SpaceX, which is going to build some new launch pads, landing pads, and surrounding infrastructure for the Super Heavy rocket systems. Some amazing stuff going on, not just with airplanes, but now with spaceships. So I'm curious then how you saw the flying machines and all of that. Like, what dreams led you into this life? First off of service, but also like flying. Turns out also some experimental planes. We'll find out in just a moment. And how did that relate to your discovery of fantastical truth and imagination?
Yeah, let me start with that part. The whole fantastical fiction. I grew up. Yeah, I read fantasy too. Like The Hobbit. I even tried that long book that starts with an S that I can't pronounce. But I was really into classic sci-fi. Arthur C. Clarke, 2001, right? Isaac Asimov. In fact, I literally within the last year, I found an old box of these like old anthologies, and one of them had this short story by Clarke, "The 9 Billion Names of God." And being a guy who grew up in church, that sort of story intrigued me. And but not to be too much of a spoiler on that short story, it ends up that it's all about God turning out the lights on the universe because people figured out his name. Which, when you think about it, it's ridiculous. I mean, the great I Am really wants to be known. And I'd say even those atheistic roots of classic sci-fi is one of those things that really motivated me to write stories where the true God of Scripture is actually in the universe. So that's been part of my motivation. And, the whole airplane thing is, I think, one of those things that God plants dreams in us, but he doesn't plant the dreams for the same reasons that maybe we think. That word does not mean what you think it means, to quote Princess Bride. So what I realized is when I went to the Air Force Academy, I thought I was going there to be a pilot, but actually it was much deeper than that because I found Jesus at the Air Force Academy. And I also met my wife at the Air Force Academy. So the two best things that came out of that experience, which God drew me to for my own purposes, he had his greater purposes, which is so fantastic the way God works.
Well, it is fantastic too, the way that the timing of these episodes somehow gets providentially planned. We are recording this episode actually on Flag Day, which in the United States celebrates the country. It's sort of a pre-4th of July, and that's on June the 14th. So it's not quite the birthday of the Air Force because 250 years ago, there were no airplanes that we know of, just the aliens, by the way.
Just the Nephilim.
Just the Nephilim. Yeah, there they go again. But it is the birthday of the U.S. Army, or the Colonial Army, which was formed in 1775. So, Dan, does that still count as a birthday sort of for the Air Force because it's still part of the U.S. military, or how does that work?
Well, look, I'm a big supporter of all of our brothers and sisters, no matter what branch of service they serve or have served in. My wife was also Air Force. My grandfather on my dad's side, he was in the Army Air Corps, which was the predecessor to the U.S. Air Force, which wasn't until 1947. So yeah, I have a lot of respect and admiration for my brothers and sisters in arms.
Dan, it's so great to hear that just like Maverick, you found love while learning how to fly fighter jets, but unlike Maverick, you found Jesus and not Scientology, as Tom Cruise did. But I'm looking at your bio here. You've flown stealth fighters, transports, trainers, helicopters, hover jets, vintage bombers, biplanes, and a Soviet MiG, and a glider. So tell us about some of your favorite things that you've flown. This is kind of our first chapter here. tell us about some fun experiences you've had in those planes and what most people don't know about those.
Yeah, well, I could tell you and then I'd have to kill you. But no, that's, so one of my stories on the F-15, I've already told you. I consider when people ask me, what was your favorite airplane? I get that all the time. Well, the F-15 was sort of like that first girlfriend. There's that thrill. That's my first fighter jet I flew and wonderful memories there. But the one that I'd marry is the F-22. And the F-22 Raptor was really designed to be the replacement for the F-15. The buzzword is air superiority. You could also use air dominance, which I actually kind of like that sound of that word. And it's one of those airplanes that's just so reliable for the battles of life. It just gives you confidence and freedom. And if you ever watch an F-22 air show, you'll just giggle, the things that it can do just in the air show environment. So that's been a lot of fun. I'll mention one other one, though, the B-2 bomber. So I happen to be, like fellow author James Hannibal, one of those Railmaker guys who's flown the B-2. And so I had a chance to fly it. And what amazed me, I'm a child of the 80s, all right? So that dates me a little bit. Like literally the 1980s arcades. I spent a lot of time there, a lot of quarters. But here's the deal. The B-2 was built around that time frame. And the avionics in the cockpit, some of them have been upgraded, but at least the one that I flew, it looked like a 1980s arcade, the raster graphics, on the thing. So you wouldn't expect, man, we got these modern airplanes, but sometimes they don't have the latest iOS, let's say, in the cockpit. And that was one of the things as test pilots that we would do. The non-sexy part of being a test pilot was testing software and making sure the software would work. The cool part was, sort of trying to break the airplane without breaking it and trying to see, set it through its paces. But there was a lot of stuff that was not Chuck Yeager, right? It was more like a software developer than it was Chuck Yeager.
Well, hopefully you're not trying to work out those software bugs while you're mid-air and you have to turn it off and turn it on back again. I guess you're up high enough.
Yes, that's a classic fix, for everything. And literally we would do that. Let's just turn off the computer and turn it back on, or sometimes shut down that engine and let's turn it back on. Those are things we actually did, believe it or not.
Wow. Sometimes it works at the highest level. So I want to get my Fs correct here, Dan. There was you said the F-15 and the F-22, both of which you flew, but you loved the F-22 more. How does that compare to, we've been hearing a lot in the news, I believe the F-35s just this past week or so. And then there's another aircraft in development. Is that the F-47?
Yeah. So the F just stands for fighter.
Right.
And so F-35, I haven't flown that one, but that I watched it in development and flew actually alongside it many, many times as it was going through its initial testing. Some of it on the Navy side, which is on the East Coast, and a lot of it in the Mojave Desert of Edwards Air Force Base, where I was both the commander and then, command became more the primary job. Pilot became the secondary job. But one of the things, as it comes down to the hovering capability, so if you want to be amazed at our technology, you watch how the back end of an F-35, there's a version that is a hover version, and how it articulates, like it turns from pointing out the back to articulating to point straight down. And it's like all of these 1,000 miracles that happen. And I remember watching that in testing on the runways of Edwards Air Force Base, going through its hover checks. And it was just amazing, like the shimmering column of air that was holding that, that multi-ton aircraft airborne.
So I guess this makes it a lot easier to land and take off from aircraft carriers.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah, because all I know is Top Gun, right? You got to fly in it like 1,000 miles an hour and just slam the brakes, and then same thing with the takeoff. You got like a couple hundred yards to not hit the ocean. So are they using these kind of, what do they call them? Vertical takeoff, the VTOL type? Is that kind of the class of these, the vertical takeoff landing? Are they
Correct.
using these more in like over the oceans on the aircraft carriers?
Well, the Navy has its own version, and the F-35 has 3 different versions. Has sort of an Air Force version, a Marine Corps version, which is the hovering version, because their ships, they have just these flat platforms that they take off and land from. But the Navy still has the catapults, still has the wires and all those things. And so they have a Navy version of the F-35, which is not vertical takeoff, but it has slightly bigger wings. That means it can have a slower speed when it comes into land.
Well, now let's talk about the aircraft that we would like to try, whether it's maybe more in testing or more on the horizon, but still kind of plausible. We'll get to the fictional stuff in a minute. My whole life, as I joked at the beginning, I get very motion sick very easily. But when I'm in control of something, I don't get motion sick. Whenever we go on road trips as a family, I always insist on driving. Also because I'm a much better driver than a backseat driver. But I get so motion sick in a car. But if I'm driving, I'm fine. And so I've reasoned to myself, okay, it's probably the same thing with airplanes. If I was in charge of an airplane, I'd probably be fine. But I don't know if I want to control a whole airplane. What I'd really like to control is a jetpack. And as a kid, we thought, oh, any day now these things will come out. We see them in movies like The Rocketeer or something like that. And then for a long time, nothing really happened. But now it does seem like there's some companies testing these. There's a company out of Dubai that lets people fly these around. There's an Italian company. I can't think of the name right now, but they have some kind of, it's sort of like a jetpack, sort of like a drone you stand on. There's a couple different versions. So to me, that would be my personal thing to own. What about you guys? What would you fly if you could get a hold of it?
Well, let me build on what you just said. As a test pilot, I met a guy who had basically a wing pack with a jet on the back, and he would jump out of an airplane, kind of like the base jumpers, with the glider, the little squirrel suits, but he'd have a jetpack so he could actually, continue to fly. and watch video of this guy's GoPro, right, going through the mountains of like Switzerland, with this thing. And that seems really cool. Except for one thing. One thing you don't know about me yet is I'm a pilot who's afraid of heights.
Huh.
And so just like, you get motion sickness, if you put me on the edge of the Grand Canyon or something, I'll do it, but it is not at all comfortable. Or one of those glass floor things, right? That you can walk out on. I'm like, no, thank you, but I'll do it. I've even gone rappelling, for some adventure courses. And I did it the Aussie style, which is where you go face forward down the cliff.
Oh, wow.
Why? Because it's a good test of faith. And I'll just say more generally, like God's going to ask us to do things that we aren't comfortable with. Think about Moses, right? Thinking about, who gave man his mouth? And so I think the things that God calls us into are often going to make us uncomfortable, and we shouldn't avoid it. It should be a way for us to just embrace God even closer. And so I think God knew that about me. Like, yeah, I know you're afraid of heights, and I'm gonna make you a pilot because he's got a great sense of humor, right? And so it's led to so many other things. But yes, the jetpack would be pretty darn cool. And I'll just add one quick thing. I'll let Stephen have his say. My daughter's favorite aircraft, she's the one who's getting that NASA payload ready. She loves the SR-71 Blackbird.
Awesome plane. Yeah.
Which just think about it. That was a product of the slide rule age. And so that would be definitely on my list, and probably a P-51 if Tom Cruise would let me borrow his.
Right now, I would just love to fly in a plane that would not charge extra for your carry-on and your check bag. But if I were to think a little bit more fantastical, I will say that to me, the best way to fly would be to be a native of the planet Krypton. Unfortunately exploded when you were a child, and then you were sent to Earth in a refugee ship raised by two kindly farmers in Kansas, after which you discover that these incredible powers you receive from Earth's young sun are sufficient to make you into Earth's champion, the original hero, Clark Kent, Kal-El, Superman. That'd be the best way to fly. And I think Dave Barry once remarked that it seems strange, though, that Superman would fly in a prone position with his fists thrown out front rather than reclining like an airline passenger. Does he have to fly in that position, or could he try some others? Well, depending on the abilities of the studio, you can make it look more realistic where he's flying in other positions, I suppose. But I suppose if you had to have a machine, frankly, I would like to try any of these. I don't get airsick, at least so far, but I'm sure that many a man has boasted of such before being taken up into some of these fighter jets and pulling all these incredible showy maneuvers. So I would not want to boast. I would just want to bring an extra airsick bag. But even being in the cockpit of a commercial airliner, I think would be amazing, because you'd have a much bigger view, stuff that I'm sure pilots try not to get bored with, especially if they're flying the same routes over and over. But I'm that guy who wants the window seat, even if it's a little bit more cramped. I want to watch the takeoff. I also have a fear of heights, but it doesn't seem so bad in an airplane. And I've nearly gotten to the point of being able to trust in the technology and the systems built by flawed human beings. So before we even get to the fantastical craft, I'm just good. I'm just good flying in the ordinary ones that we have. I would just like to have a better view and less cost for the overhead.
You know, it's funny. I've never had a fear of heights. In fact, it's almost like a love of heights. And I going up in airplanes, it doesn't really bother me. I'm just kind of like, if I perish, I perish. And I don't know if I think it goes back pretty far in my life. But when I was in college, I did some skydiving. It just once for a friend's bachelor party. We kind of surprised him / kidnapped him, and we all jumped out of a perfectly good airplane. And there was just something so fun about it. I mean, it was just the static line jump where you're tied to the airplane and it automatically opens your chute when you jump out. And then you're just floating in the air about a mile above the ground. And it was just, I loved every second of that. I don't know. There's something about just floating, not falling, but floating over the land that's really cool. But okay, now I want to talk about the best and the worst aircraft in fiction. So this can be something you really loved in a story or movie or something and I really want to pick on you here, Dan, about aircraft or spaceships that just really annoy you as a pilot, knowing how aircraft actually work. I want to hear about those pet peeves you've had in movies. I'm going to tell mine really quick, just as an example. So there was a Brad Pitt movie a couple years ago called Ad Astra. It came out on my birthday. I was so excited to see it. I think this was like, I forget which year this was, during the COVID years or something, but it was like, so excited to see a movie, and that movies are open again. They're like flying all the way to Neptune or something. And then they're like, we need to take a detour to this space station in the middle of nowhere, outer space. So let's just kind of like do a U-turn and go there. And then we'll just keep going to Neptune. It's like, what? Like, that's not how spaceships work. Like, you can't just stop and turn around and then keep going, like, because this was like basically near future. These weren't like, fusion powered. These are just regular rockets that, Newton's laws and everything. You can't just turn on a dime and then have enough fuel to keep going. And then there's a scene at the end where he's on some jetpack and he's going out to actually, let's see, I said Neptune, I think it was Uranus, and he's going from like one level of the rings to the other, and he just kind of just like pushes his way up into higher orbit. And I'm like, no, you can't just do that with a little jetpack.
It's not how the Force works.
Yeah. So that whole movie, it was so disappointing because it looked so cool, and there was a lot of. It was actually a father-son movie, which we'll get into that later in like chapter 2 or 3. But yeah, even just the rudimentary stuff I know about rocketry, I'm like, none of that works. So Dan, what were those moments in movies that just really got under your skin?
Yeah, and I can relate to the space side of things. I mean, I'm reading through some of the Expanse books right now, and one of the things they at least try to do is recognize, if you're going to accelerate a spaceship, if you want to stop, you have to turn it around and retrofire, basically, in order to, enter orbit or whatever. When I watch shows that have a lot of aircraft, attacking the aliens, let's say Independence Day, it's one of those classics, right? And even my wife, she was Air Force too, not a pilot, be like, kind of like, almost not quite screaming at the screen, not in the movie theater, but, at home, like, oh, come on, guys, there's way better tactics than what you guys are doing. Let's all just kind of all just clump together to make it easier for the aliens to pick us off, right? Pretty sure what's going on in the world right now, that's not what good tactics look like when you're trying to attack a hardened target. So those things obviously are a little annoying. I didn't know better when I watched the first Top Gun movie. Like flying with your mask off is not really a good idea if you're pulling Gs, because you like to breathe. When you're pulling 9 Gs and you weigh basically 9 times your body weight and all your blood is trying to go to your big toes, it's really good to have oxygen. So because you're grunting with everything you're worth to try to push that blood back up to your brain. So that sort of stuff is always kind of amusing to me. I mean, I know why Hollywood does it, so you can see the pretty
got to
actors.
see the actor. Yep. Mm-hmm.
which is why I'll give props to Top Gun Maverick, the second one, for actually putting them in the back seat of F-18s and giving a small sense of what it feels like or looks like to be pulling Gs. I'm sure they did not go to 9. Number one, the F-18 is not rated to go to 9 Gs, but I'm sure they at least pulled maybe 4 or 5, like what you might get in a really intense roller coaster. So yes, those type of things, it annoys me when they don't even try, but I guess it depends on the genre, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody is taking tactical lessons from Independence Day. At least I hope not. I hope the defense of our country does not depend on tactics and Independence Day.
Stephen, what about you? What are some even us non-pilots, we can kind of recognize some pilot errors happening in stories. Anything come to mind for you?
Well, as cool as the helicarrier reveal moment was in the original Avengers 2012, I don't know if it's aged all that well because it is hideously impractical. Just these giant fans in the original Avengers, and they're somehow keeping this gargantuan aircraft carrier sized contraption aloft. I'm sure it's straight from the comics, and we were all happy. I was happy, but just in terms of practicality, I think that's where that universe moved a little bit away from the direction of at least the sort of grounded nature of the first Iron Man, and a lot more in the fantastical direction.
And what was great about that scene was they're like, hey, don't worry about how the fans work. We're going to turn it invisible. It's like, we're just going to go from one crazy thing to another.
I believe the invisible part. I actually can believe that a little bit more than the giant fans keeping this, multi-100-ton machine above the earth.
Yeah. Make sure you don't turn on your ceiling fans this summer because it might pull your roof right off.
It's like Calvin getting a beanie with a propeller on the top and assuming it's going to make him fly.
Okay, now we've talked about Harrier jets. I want to know one question here, Dan. The Harrier jet that Arnold Schwarzenegger's character flies in True Lies, flies it around a building. I think he lands on a roof. He learns how to fly a plane in like no time, which is maybe the most unbelievable part. But have you seen that movie, and what did you think about those scenes?
Yeah, it's been a long time, so I can't remember the specific scenes. I will say, because I've flown the Harrier jet once, right? Now, this is what happens with test pilots. They're like, here, why don't you go check out and see what it's like to fly the Harrier? And of course, we have an instructor, right? Like even someone who's a pretty skilled test pilot, you want to know like how to turn the thing on right and what it looks like to land. But even that is a 1970s technology, and it's not as robust as, let's say, the F-35 for hovering. So if it was a hot day in LA, I think that's where the scene took place. If it's a hot day and he's trying to land, it's going to have a hard time unless it's really low on gas. So if it's heavyweight, it's just not going to be able to do a nice vertical takeoff or vertical landing really well. But those are part of the fictional stories, and even in the hover jet that I have in my book, I recognize there's times when probably hovering would not be a good idea. But there's always a bit of fiction that you got to throw into these things.
Well, speaking of science fiction, let's go to our second sponsor today, which is author J.A. Webb with his book Inheritance. This is book 2 of the Seekers series, now available. The order has been betrayed. The hunters have been loosed. Father Curtis has forsaken his vows. He has left the order and joined the Seekers, a hidden rebellion dedicated to uncovering the truth long buried by the global church. But walking away from the order does not mean escaping its reach. When word spreads that a copy of the true text, the original 39 books of the Creator, has surfaced on the far side of the world, Curtis, Professor Ruel, and Philip embark on a desperate mission. If they can retrieve the artifact, it could change everything. If they fail, the truth will be lost forever. But the Eye of the Eternal, the secret police of the Order, has already mobilized. Their assassins are relentless, their power is absolute, and they will stop at nothing to silence the truth. If you like stories of faith, defiance, and the battle against unseen tyranny, you will love Inheritance, book 2 of the Seekers series. Book 1, Fragments, is now available, and so is book 2, Inheritance. You can find those at Amazon, links in our show notes for this episode 267, or go to jawebauthor.com. That is letter J, letter A, and then web with 2 B's, author.com.
All right. Well, now we're going to go into chapter 2 and talk about good fathers in stories. So these can be books, movies, TV shows, whatever we want to jump into. We're going to talk about kind of the natural fathers adoptive dads and just men who are changed in some way. Maybe they are more like father figures, so not necessarily more like official or legal dads. Well, I mentioned Ad Astra in the beginning, and so again, this was a movie I really wanted to like, and it was because it was about a father and a son. And actually, I looked this up. It was Neptune, not Uranus, that's involved. But Brad Pitt is this not young man, but kind of middle-aged man, my age, and his father, who's played by Tommy Lee Jones, had gone out all the way to Neptune to go to this space station orbiting the planet that was somehow set up to scan the universe for intelligent life, other inhabited planets, and any kind of alien signals. And basically, there's this mystery about whether he had stayed true to his mission, because he was known. His name is the character's name is Clifford. He was known as this hero in all of these circles. And then there's kind of these rumors and different stories about, maybe he mutinied and maybe he's gonna cause a disaster back on Earth because of sciencey reasons we don't need to go into. But Brad Pitt, Roy, has to, decide, do I let this kind of story about my dad take over and just let him basically die or be killed, or do I go out and save him and try to redeem him? And so and they have a really interesting moment at the end, and I won't spoil it because it's kind of a newish movie, and it's worth it for that reason. It was very much a redemption story though, and it was like a reunion and just like a good bonding kind of story. So for Father's Day, I'd recommend it for that reason. For the more sciencey people, you're going to be as annoyed as I was. So, Deanne, what are some stories that you've enjoyed that deal with the father figure?
Well, hey, I'm going to give Steven some props, in Above the Circle of Earth. Brock is no perfect father, but he, the whole fatherhood theme is woven in there. And of course, the husband-wife theme. So I think it's great to explore that well and deeply. One of my top 3 movies, I've already quoted The Princess Bride because that's another one of them, is Interstellar. And that whole father-daughter story, with Coop, who admittedly he probably could have mentored his son Tom a little bit better, but keeping his promise to Murph, right? And just it's a father's cry at the end, right? When he's crying to himself, no big spoilers, right? Basically saying you should have made a different decision. And so there's such a redemptive arc there, and such a, like at the end, again, not to spoil it for viewers. If you haven't seen Interstellar, it honors a family well, and it's just a well-told story. And so there's just that moment at the end, right, where there's like, yes, it's okay. And so I think that's just a beautiful story of a father who's not perfect. He thinks he's trying to do the right thing, right? And it's of course one of these save the world type of things. So his son and daughter are part of that. So I love that one.
One of my favorite stories is, oddly enough, I just realized that, of course, they released the live action version on Father's Day weekend, and that is How to Train Your Dragon. So jumping from sci-fi to fantasy, it's a wonderful, simple, yet profound father-son story that comes at it from a different angle. Instead of the whole scene where father has to realize that his son is his own man and the father's been too rough on him and such, it's very different in both the animated and the live action version, which, by the way, go see the live action version. They got it right. They largely, almost entirely 100% got it right. Same director, and J.R.R. Butler, again, playing Stoic, the father figure and the chief of the Viking tribe. I absolutely love his portrayal. The story is entirely as sympathetic to him as it is to Hiccup, his son, who it turns out, spoiler alert, is never going to be a dragon killer. Let's just put that one out there. But at the end, there's this wonderful reconciliation and kind of a recognition by the father that the son is onto something that the father missed. But then the other 2 stories in the original animated trilogy, and hopefully the live action sequels will stick to this also, shot for shot, like this one did, also shows Hiccup coming into his own and realizing the responsibility that he now has as the son of the chief, and then his growing role in leadership of the tribe. And it's a great way to show that interplay between the father and son, is that the father knows things, but the father can also learn from the son. But the son really needs to step up and realize the responsibility to which a good dad has been called. We'll talk about bad dads in a moment and some of the dirtier decisions that men often have to make in particular callings. But you see that even in the live action where Butler, I feel he stole the show. This is a character he's voiced for at least 1.5 movies and a little bit in the third. But he was just in his element, like in full Viking regalia, and just his voice breaking at key moments. And you could just see the burden of responsibility in his eyes, where he has to manage this entire tribe, but then also worry about his son and his son's future and whether or not his son will be able to take up the fight that this tribe of Vikings has been taking up against the dragons. I absolutely loved it. It was, it's heartfelt. Dan, I've noticed, and Zach, I've noticed, lots of really great stories deal with father-son relationships.
Yeah.
And when stories distance themselves from that, as we've often seen with some of the more critically maligned stories lately, sci-fi and fantasy especially, when you get away from that, you tend to get away from better storytelling. And I think that's because the better stories are going to, one way or another, reflect in some dim fashion, some human way, the relationship that God the Father has with his creation, with us as his children. And the better stories are going to tribute that. The lesser stories are going to reject it.
It wouldn't be Fantastical Truth if I didn't mention my favorite fantasy series, The Wheel of Time, and specifically The Eye of the World, the first book in the series. It has not one, but 3 awesome father figures. So the story follows the 3 young men out of the 2 rivers, Rand, Matt, and Perrin. And all of them have to, with some other people, leave their village and go on this quest. But each of them is given a father figure. So Rand has Lan, who's the warder, like the mysterious warrior with a very interesting past of his own and a connection to his father. And then there's Tom Marilyn, who kind of is the father figure for Matt. He's the gleeman, so the juggler or the storyteller, which is perfect for Matt, who is the kind of the troublemaker. And then there's Elias, who is a former warder, but he becomes this he's this wolf man kind of person. Like, he doesn't turn into a wolf, but he communicates with wolves. And Perrin is able to communicate with wolves, and so Elias teaches them how to do this. And so all throughout that book, these 3 older men kind of take these younger men into manhood by teaching them what it means to be a man, what it means to have these different skills and professions, but more, it's like the life lessons. And there are so many quotes from those father figures I still think about, because I read that book as a young man without a father. And so I really latched on to that aspect of like these men teaching people my age, like what it means to grow up and how to be a really wise man and not some kind of foolish man. I think that's why I've always loved the book of Proverbs, because it's written from a father to a son, and it teaches you all these ways to live a good life and not a stupid life. Don't be the fool in the book of Proverbs. But as I always have to say, do not watch the Wheel of Time TV show. If anything, get the graphic novels, which I'm reading, which are excellent.
Zach, they just canceled the Wheel of Time TV show.
Thank
I
goodness.
didn't want to bring it up. I thought you'd be in grief. You'd be in mourning. Oh no,
mixed
another
feelings,
good one
yeah.
canceled by one of those corporations. It just doesn't care for amazing storytelling. They just couldn't let it keep going.
No, I mean, I'm disappointed that it had to come to that, of course. I'm not sad to see something bad get taken off the air. And my hope is that they'll turn it into an animation, because, as I said, the graphic novel is excellent. It stays true, and it's fun to see it come to life visually. But anyway, Dan, what are some of your favorite fictional fathers?
Yeah, and if I could tie in, Stephen, what you brought up about just like this yearning we have for a good father, right? That's like God implanting that in us. We want good fatherhood. And the absence of good fathers or the presence of abusive ones, it's such a danger, right, to civilization and to health. But I mean, just think about even just the father figures, right? The Gandalfs, the Obi-Wans, right? Even Yoda in his own little green way. This, how to speak wisdom, how to tame kind of the wilder heart, especially of young men, how to direct them. The sad truth of the matter is, whenever something bad happens in the world, most of the time it's a guy. And so the influence of good fathers, not just raising sons, but also our daughters, I think is really important. So back to your question, though, Zach, I actually really like the arc of Tony Stark.
Mm.
right? I really like, he goes from playboy to basically a sacrificial father. Of course, he has his own father wound, right? And he has to push past that and break that chain. And then he takes on Spider-Man under his wing like a son, right? And then, towards the end game, literally, he has his own child, and that the own stakes of that and what he's willing to risk for not only his own child, but for other families. So I think that is, by the way, just in the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe, that's one thing they really got right. And they need to get back to some of that, those big story arcs that actually, can't solve it maybe in one movie. And that certainly was going to be the case for Tony Stark. But I think that's one of the strongest threads through the entire, that first installment, if you will, of the MCU.
I'll kick in one last submission for a great fictional father story, and it is actually season 3 of Star Trek Picard. It's not only amazing father-son story with some twists in there, but still very traditional, but also the entire theme of that plot arc is about the interplay between the older generation and the next generation. So it actually takes the title of that whole Star Trek television series and goes meta with it in the story of Star Trek season 3. You don't need to watch seasons 1 through 2, just season 3. Any references to previous seasons are kind of moot. You'll catch up to them. Picard's an android now because reasons. That's all you need to know. There are problems with fathers for sure, and we'll talk about that in our next chapter. Certainly a lot of wounds going on out there, but at their best, dads and men who act as father figures are like mentors, which leads me to sponsor 3, which is the company, which is Kingdom Writers and World Changers. They're the ones that are going to help you if you are hankering to write your own story by any chance. They'll help you do that. Isn't it time for a real adventure? The company is now enrolling writing apprentices for this fall. The Writing Apprenticeship is a full-time, in-person college alternative for Christian writers who are serious about reaching big audiences with their work. Join the company at their headquarters in Cambridge, Ohio, to start living your dream as a writer. Apprentices improve their writing skills, learn to leverage opportunities within the publishing industry, and develop real experience marketing books. The company's apprenticeship also includes an in-depth spiritual development curriculum. You will learn and do so much, and you'll have a lot of fun doing it. If you dream of writing and publishing, this is the shortest path between you and your goals. Learn more and get started at this URL, writers.company. That's what you type in your browser, writers.company. The company also offers a variety of online courses and resources for Christian writers who are serious about leveling up and breaking boundaries with their work. Check out their website at writers.company to begin your adventure today.
All right, now we're moving into chapter 3. We're going to talk about the dads who are redeemed in stories. So we're not going to just focus on bad dads and bad fathers and bad men, but we are going to talk about what you could say are bad jobs. So maybe this is a bad job in the sense that it's just drudgery, but men do it anyway. Or we're going to talk about dirty jobs, which somebody's got to do them. And then we're going to talk about, more of the morally challenging jobs. And Dan, that's where we'll talk about your book that's coming out, Whole Man. I keep seeing these memes about the movies from the 1990s about the office drudgery jobs, like Fight Club is probably the biggest example, or Office Space, or even The Office TV series that, there's all these men that have these jobs they kind of hate, but they do them anyway. And then there's the Dirty Jobs TV show, which is
Mike Rowe.
Mike Rowe, thank you. Dads that work in oil fields or in the swamp or just in these crazy or dangerous environments. And, then they're just home at night, putting the kids to bed, paying the bills and stuff. But I think my favorite type of story in this, in what we're going to talk about, is something like Alias, which was the TV show about 25 years ago, helmed by J.J. Abrams before he ruined Star Wars. And it stars Jennifer Garner, and then she's this character that's brought into the CIA, and she's, wow, okay, now we're gonna bring you into this Black Ops program called SD6. Wow. And then she finds out from her dad, Jack Bristow, that actually this is a mercenary group pretending to be the CIA that I have infiltrated, and now we're going to be double agents together. So it's a father-daughter story. And it sounds fun that they get to be spies and double agents, but it often involves very terrible things that both of them have to do to keep the country safe. You could say moral compromises, but also just very hard decisions that they've got to make. And then over and over again, Jack Bristow, he always protects his daughter. And then he always tries to do what's right, to be loyal to the country and ultimately take down this spider web of evil guys from the Alliance. It doesn't always look like he's doing the right thing because he's got a kind of a greater goal in mind. And so I thought that was a story that really honored what I'm talking about well, of just men that do these very challenging types of jobs for a good purpose. So Dan, what are some stories like this, or what are just some realities of jobs like this in the military or whatnot, where it can present those challenges, but you see that honorable way that men try to tackle these jobs?
Yeah, and by the way, Alias was a great series. So with my military background, everyone has their own views on the military, and that's fine. Everyone within the military has their own views, actually, on the military. And one of the things that is imperative in our military, number one, we're a volunteer service, right? So you get to say you're not drafted in. You may still fill out a draft card, but you're not drafted in. So you serve because you chose to. The other thing is you don't get to say whether or not you like the job, right? I mean, you don't, I don't want to go to Iraq. Sorry. No, that's not part of the deal. By virtue of that, you're called to do things, not I'm saying immoral things, but you're called to do very tough things. I'll give you an example that some people don't think about, but it's a reality just from even just mental health. We have people who are doing jobs, flying drones. They're sitting here, or let's say in Nevada, in their little compartment, and then they're flying a drone that's killing bad guys, and then they're going home to their wife and kids and soccer games. Okay. So can you imagine, right, the sort of mental shift they're trying to make when they realize they have just blown up some human beings? Now, maybe they're human beings doing bad things, but imagine as a Christian, and this is one of the things I had to wrestle with as a believer, was, hey, I may be killing somebody, like literally killing somebody, and they're just doing their job too. Now, terrorists are a different deal. But one of the things I really had to wrestle with was, okay, am I okay with sending a missile downrange that's going to turn a human being into slag? I mean, it's the family would be just grieving the hole that's left in their life. So that was something I had to wrestle with about the purpose behind what we do. So yeah, that's an extreme, but you can imagine people who are police. And again, I'm not trying to make any political statement. I'm saying they have a very high divorce rate because they strap on that bulletproof vest every day. It's not like just deploying for 6 months and you're worried about them for that period. Every single day they go out, that vest represents, my husband or my wife, if she's the cop, could maybe not be coming home because at a traffic stop, right, someone decides to take them out. So those are the realities that some families, and certainly military families at various times, deal with.
Yeah, and that's what I'm talking about with it. It's a bad job in the sense it's bad for them in a lot of ways, right? It's like they're putting themselves in harm's way, and then they're having to wrestle with that. Wow, I'm going to have to harm someone, and I'm not someone that wants to do that, but I've got to protect other people. And that was something I really picked up on from Chris Kyle's autobiography, American Sniper, is that he didn't go into combat to just shoot a bunch of bad guys with a sniper rifle. He went there to protect his fellow Marines and he was a Navy SEAL, but he would be detached with the Marines. And so he was always thinking about, I want to bring these guys home, right? Like, it's not that I want a high body count of kill count or something. But I've got to do that. And in the book, and I think they showed this in the movie, his first kill was actually a woman that had on a suicide vest or picked up a rifle and shot at him. I can't remember exactly. And so again, talk about moral dilemmas, right? And so, but someone's got to tackle that, right? Someone's got to protect our society from disorder and chaos and evil. But that's not quite a fun job in that sense. But that's what makes it all the more honorable that people are willing to take up that mantle.
I think it's fascinating, even in recently as we record, that there's a lot of misunderstanding about people, largely men, who have to do these kinds of jobs. And people get very uncomfortable at the imaginative and even moral level about this idea of a difficult job that involves difficult decisions, life and death decisions. And I think this leads some people into a sort of thoughtless or immoral pacifistic stance where we're uncomfortable with these difficult decisions and these difficult realities of living in a sinful world and having to reckon with this, even as faithful believers or even just decent people who are not Christians. And folks will often just turn and go, well, we just ought not to have any of that sort of thing. Stop all war, just stop the violence. And it's kind of a reclusive, self-over-sheltering response, in my view, that doesn't reckon seriously with the difficult moralities, the difficult complexities here, which also kind of ties this all together into the story that you've been working on, Dan, which includes cool airships, cool aircraft, futuristic style in a science fiction setting. This idea too of fatherhood and a man who needs to overcome the complexities of his job, which is a much more cosmic version of a dirty job. So why won't you then tell us some, Dan, about The Whole Man?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. The premise is the whole man does have the ugliest job in the whole universe because he feeds human sacrifices into a black hole. And as a father, he's left his teenage daughter behind to go do this horrible duty. And he's been alone in this remote space station where he does that. And he's hoping that by doing this, that one job, right, he'll be able to come home and kind of clean the slate, because the ruler of their planet, who is really the second father in this story, not the good one, he promised, okay, well, if you do this, then we'll clear your slate. And there's more, of course, to that backstory. When I went about to write it, it wasn't initially just about fatherhood. It was really about, are we forever defined by our darkest sins? And look, we all have things we're not proud of doing. But does that define us? Is that how God looks at us? And so that was sort of at the back of my mind, like, what would it be like to be an executioner? And oh, by the way, in a cosmic setting, I grew up spending a couple years in Mexico and toured all the Mayan ruins and the Aztec ruins. And there's one particular place in Chichen Itza, which has this big hole in the ground where they would throw often kids in as sacrifices to the water god. And that was a bit of the inspiration behind this crazy thing. Well, what if it wasn't a hole in the ground? What if it was a black hole? And what kind of society would say that's okay? What would they come up with, and what would it be like to be that guy? So yeah, there's two fathers in the story: the whole man, and he's trying to redeem himself. You've got the second father I've mentioned, who doubles down on his sin, really. And the third is off stage, a little bit like Tony Stark's dad, but is still sort of exerting his influence, right, on the whole man. So yeah, it has definitely some dark and gritty undertones, but ultimately it's a redemption story.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think that's exactly the kind of story that a lot of men need, because especially as you mentioned, a lot of men that come out of the military, and I have several military friends, and they wonder, like, what was I there for? Like, what good did that do? And if we've all seen the statistics about mental health crisis with the military, and I think just that having that sense of purpose, but more than that, having that hope of redemption, I think, is crucial for a lot of people. I know someone here in the local police force, and he's very much talked about that. Like you said, the high divorce rate. Yeah, that's something I've heard many times. The stress that puts, and I think it really comes from that sense of, like, does what I do matter, and was it good? Because you think about it, any man that has a job to support his family, like, you're giving your time, right, that you can never get back. You're giving so much of your intellectual, your emotional, and even just your spiritual, like, energy to this job, or obviously for a paycheck and whatnot. But then there's so many things you can't get back that you give to a job, whatever it is. So then you wonder, like, well, that took me away from my family, and not just physically away. It took me mentally away a lot of times. So was that payoff worth it? And I think that's what men are always doing is. And so I like that this story has something. First of all, it's very cosmic, as you said, but it's also something very spiritual that goes back to ancient times. And I think we are moving into a world like that is becoming simultaneously more scientific and more supernatural. Like, I just read a story this morning where someone used ChatGPT as basically an Ouija board, and wanted to commune with, interdimensional entities, and then one appeared by the name of, well, I don't want to repeat the name, but it gave itself a name.
Don't say it 3 times. We don't need any of that around this here. Bad energy.
Yeah, and basically convinced her to leave her family. And then just so many other crazy stories like that are happening. And so I think that the supernatural is never going to leave our world because it is part of our world. So the only question is, like, how is that going to transform the ways that we use technology and sort of the jobs that we create around them?
Well, and the weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. And so it ultimately is a spiritual battle. And I think it's good for you to just, remind our listeners, that's not everything is a devil under every rock, but to also the other extreme would be to completely ignore the fact that that's out there. I mean, in my jobs, and I work with leaders as well as in ministry, as well as writing. I would say this whole year has been spiritual battle after spiritual battle. And I think it's because anytime we're trying to do something good in the world, we're going to face resistance. And so this is why I said, even like that pilot who's afraid of heights, anytime we're trying to do something good, it's going to be uncomfortable. There's going to be resistance and criticism, and God is with us. And he's saying, yep, that's how it worked for me. Right. So I think there's also a lot of hope in that, hey, it's okay if you're facing opposition, or if you're feeling a little blue, or if you're like, I don't know if I should do this. Well, God is faithful. He's always present with you.
One might even say, Dan, that if you're facing that kind of opposition, it might reveal that you're over the target. So I'm curious about your target for The Whole Man. If this is a finished story, if you're pitching it or going to independently publish it, how can folks get a hold of this story, or maybe get a hold of this story based on the plans you have now?
Yeah, well, great. So right now, I'm putting it out through a Kickstarter in July for kind of early supporters. I expect to get it out either late this year, early next. Really, most of the writing's done. I'm going through some final edits. The exciting part is I'll have a cover reveal. A cover designer, Emily, who you probably know, is doing a fantastic job on that. And so if you reach me at sci-fi-pilot.com, and you can get on my list, and I can clue you in when the cover reveal is happening, or on Instagram, I'm on Sci-Fi Pilot author. But yeah, I mean, it's exciting to get it out in the hands of people. I would say, fair warning, I mean, there are some things in this that are just uncomfortable. I really try not to be graphic. I don't drop any F-bombs or anything like that. I believe in making this as clean as possible. But there are elements of the story that if you're a young teen, probably use a lot of discernment as a parent. However, if you're an older teen or a young adult, that was really, my target was mostly people in their 20s. It's an intergenerational story. Right. So there's the daughter who's now in her 20s. There's the whole man who's not as old as those of us who are on this call, but he's at least had a daughter. And then there's another very key character, and I don't want to spoil a lot, but it's one of the sacrifices that he's being asked to throw into the black hole, and he has to make a choice, and that sets a lot of the rest of the story in motion. And so that's a character in their 30s. And I really love, as much as I like YA and I understand the audience there, this was a story to sort of cross those boundaries a bit too. That whether you're in your late teens, 20s, 30s, or even older, this is a story I think you can find resonance in the characters.
That is the space in which I live. Dan, I'm looking forward to this. The Whole Man, probably out early next year, depending on how the Kickstarter goes. But you can get more information, faithful listeners, by going to sci-fi-pilot.com. Sounds like that's your same handle on Instagram and any other socials, Dan. Really appreciate you flying in. Lots of wisdom here, lots of great experience, and some great wisdom, especially about dads and mentoring and those sorts of things that we need. Even when the dads have some baggage in their past or some tragic backstory, or just have to do some difficult things on the job. Just imagine, I'm imagining at least, the ultimate father, capital F, who definitely has to do some difficult things on the job, being God, certainly sacrificing himself in the person of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. So there it is, even at the very foundation of the universe, that father-son relationship. That is what God is presenting to us, as those two persons of the Trinity, in addition to the Holy Spirit. So if anybody has any father issues out there, certainly present company not exempt here. Look to God, our capital F Father. See how he does it. See the difficult things that he has to do. And yet, unlike the human fathers, he never, ever, ever sins. He's perfect. So, Dan, appreciate your thoughts. And hopefully it'll be an easy cleanup before you can get back into that hovercraft and soar back into the sky.
Yeah, great being with you guys. And again, sorry for messing up your studio here with the hoverjet exhaust.
It's okay. It was a redemptive episode anyway, which kind of keeps with the theme. Appreciate it, brother.
Well, it's not every day you get to talk to a fighter pilot that's broken the sound barrier a couple times over. So that was really fun to talk to Dan. And by the way, he's on his website, he's got a free short story if you sign up called The Storm of the Eye. Interesting title. And it's a prequel or origin story to the characters in The Whole Man. So it's about this fighter pilot that has to leave his birthday party and go fly after the bad guys who are waiting for him in an ambush. It sounds awesome. So make sure to go to sci-fi-pilot.com to get that free story. Well, we want to ask you, our listener, who is your favorite fantastical father? So bonus points if this was someone that also flew some kind of aircraft or spaceship, and even more bonus points if it's someone that had a redemption story. So send us a note to podcast@lorehaven.com. Mention your favorite fantastical father. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Next on Fantastical Truth, Jesus told many parables. Some of those were even fantastical. Yet some Christians presume these parables are simple allegories. Is this really the point of parables, or do they reflect biblical truths in more meaningful ways? Next week, we are inviting Crew Ministry creatives who have made a new audio drama inspired by the parable of the prodigal son called The Road to Keluma. We will explore questions like, what are fantastical parables, and how do they prepare us for conversations about family relationships, the gospel, and the love of our Heavenly Father? As I mentioned earlier, it is God's love as Father that should set our expectations for human fathers. Bad ones, good ones, or bad ones trying to be good ones, or good ones falling away. There's all kinds of tragic backstories out there. Let's not be shaped by those tragic backstories. Even if your dad had to do a dirty job, let's instead look to God, our Heavenly Father, to set that standard, and then realize that we ourselves have broken that standard. Not just bad old dad out there, but that we can run to him in repentance and be born again, to be his adopted children, which causes us to rejoice and make amazing stories. And we continue to seek and find these fantastical truths.